was quite a spectacle in the Oval Office on Friday. What were we watching?
Well, sometimes public diplomacy doesn't work, but in these kind of situations, I think you have to be Finnish. Take a deep breath, take a cold bath, sauna, breathe, get back to the negotiating table. These things happen sometimes.
What's the way forward?
The way forward is to get President Zelensky and President Trump to communicate again and to get a minerals deal. I think that'll probably be a tipping point for a bigger deal towards a ceasefire and then towards peace negotiations. I don't think we are as far away as probably the public indicates.
We heard from the NATO Secretary General that it is up to President Zelensky to repair his relationship with President Trump. Do you agree?
I think it always takes two to tango. You know, sometimes what happens in marriage or in other types of relationships, you sort of go into your corner and sulk, but you have to come out of there, have a conversation, shake hands, and move on.
And do you think we're close to that point?
Yes, I hope we're moving. I mean, I think one of the things that we're trying to do in London with this summit organized by British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is to get a reading of the 3 meetings that were held with President Trump last week, take the best parts of it and find a way forward.
What does Europe need to do now, though?
We need to have a plan. One of the problems is that we have sort of this cacophonic diplomacy. We have different types of groupings and organizations dealing with different types of things. If we want to have an initiative, there needs to be a European and Ukrainian peace plan with which we can then talk with President Trump and later on with President Putin.
What is your message today?
My message today is that we need a plan which should have 3 phases. First, what do we do before the negotiations start? In other words, put Ukraine into a position of strength, give them military, political and financial support, and put more pressure on Russia, sanctions, and use the frozen assets. And then find some kind of security arrangements where Ukraine takes the lead, Europe supports, and the US provides the backstop. That's stage number 1. Give that as a plan. Stage number 2 is a ceasefire, and stage number 3 is actual peace negotiations. We just need to put things together, and I think we are in the right direction to do that.
President, who speaks for Europe?
Good question. I think the late Henry Kissinger once said European foreign policy is all a good thing, but who should I call? Right now, there are too many phone numbers. If it was up to me, I think we actually need a European special envoy. It can be 1, 2, or 3 people. I don't care. We probably need to have the big states here, so I think it's good that France and the UK are taking leadership here. I'm also hopefully glad to see Germany with skin in the game at some stage. So many different possibilities, but the problem that we have in the European Union right now is that we have 2 countries in the form of Slovakia and Hungary, which basically have a different view on Ukraine. The rest of us are friends of Ukraine. So the leadership of Europe right now is a coalition of the willing, and most of the countries are here in London today.
How optimistic are you about Europe's ability to stay together?
I'm very optimistic. I actually, I'm an EU nerd. I've been that for 30 years, and I've never seen the European Union more united. Actually, for the past 10 years. It started with Brexit, went on with Trump's first term, then COVID, war in Ukraine, energy, and now finding a peace solution. It's a little bit cacophonic, but it is united.
Do you worry that Russia is trying to influence different spheres, and with what's happening in the US administration, it makes it more difficult for Europe to go forward?
We need the United States, and that's why I think that the minerals deal is so important, because that could be the tipping point, which then gives a very strong business stake for the President of the United States, who works, for better or for worse, on a very transactional basis. So this is the reason I'm hopeful that we'll find a solution, and I think London is important from that perspective as well.
Why is it important to have Europe at the table when any peace agreement or any other agreement is negotiated between the US and Russia?
Because this is not only about the independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. This is also about European security. It's about the free world, and it is about the international rules-based order. That's why Europe should be involved.
Does the US understand that?
Oh yes, I do think so. But remember that peace negotiations usually take place not around one table where you suddenly then get white smoke coming out of the chimney. You have different types of players. Right now, I just feel that for the past 2 or 3 weeks, Europe has not been a player, but this last week has shown that we can be a player. Macron visiting the White House, Keir Starmer visiting the White House, and Zelensky doing that as well, one step at a time.
What is the right way for Europe to deal with Orban in this current state of play?
It's a good question to which I don't have an answer. I think coalition of the willing is. You know, in 1999, I wrote a PhD on flexible integration, on not everyone having to be involved in every decision, and perhaps that's the right way to do it.
Is there a worry overall across the world that the US is trying to influence spheres and break away, actually, from Europe?
I mean, I think the transatlantic alliance is shifting. Instead of complaining about it, you have to analyze it and draw your conclusions. Now, my conclusion is that when it comes to multilateral institutions, such as the UN or the WTO or the ICC, that's where we don't see American-European engagement together. I think the vote in the UN this week was an example of that. But when it comes to bilateral alliances and actually regional alliances, so the relationship with Finland to the US, we do icebreakers, defense and technology, or when it comes to NATO, that's where we need to be steadfast with the Americans and say that, listen, the alternative cost of pulling out of NATO means that the US is going to lose its status as a superpower. So I'm still hopeful that we can work with the Americans. I don't think we should give up hope.
Do you believe Europe is still shielded by NATO's nuclear umbrella?
Well, yes, I do. I think that is the key, of course. When it comes to strategic alliances, the nuclear umbrella is obviously a key.
Is it fraying? How would you describe it? Is that your deepest worry?
I think the nuclear issue in general right now is multifaceted because we have more or less 10 countries in the world with a nuclear arsenal. In order for us to have the 3 pillars of NATO in terms of deterrence, in other words, our troops, our missiles, if you will, and then nuclear, the US needs to stay involved, and I'm sure it will.
What are the risks in striking a deal with Vladimir Putin?
Well, first of all, you have to believe that that deal is permanent. And as we know, since 2014, Vladimir Putin has broken a ceasefire 25 times. I was engaged in negotiating a ceasefire in Georgia in 2008. That was held, but it led to a frozen conflict. The only thing that Vladimir Putin understands is power. You show any kind of a weakness, and he will basically go after you. There's a Russian saying that if you use a knife or a bayonet and push in and it's soft, go all the way. If it's hard, pull back. Let's be hard.
Can President Trump actually trust Vladimir Putin? Again, what's the
I don't think
way?
anyone can trust Vladimir Putin. But don't underestimate the capacity of Donald Trump to negotiate a deal, and a tough deal. The most important thing we have to understand that if that deal shows any kind of weakness or loss for Ukraine, we have all lost. For me, it's an issue about the triangle of statehood: independence, sovereignty to decide, and territorial integrity. And let's make sure that all of those stay intact after the peace negotiations are over.
What do you think is the only way for Russia not to come back for more bits of Europe?
That there is at least a de facto membership of NATO for Ukraine, which basically means that if they don't get into the organization as such, there's a deal that if there's a breaking of the ceasefire or the peace deal, Ukraine becomes automatically a member of NATO.
Will the US support that?
It's a US idea from the beginning, so let's see.
Do there need to be any more guarantees?
I think that's a good start. And you have to remember that when it comes to defense guarantees, and believe me, I know it, with 1,340 kilometers of border with Russia, the number one thing is your own defense. And Ukraine has right now the strongest defense and most experienced military in Europe, with 800,000 men and women, plus equipment, defense equipment. They are armed to their teeth. So that's the number one security guarantee. But then it's always good to have friends, and that's why you need, in the long run, EU membership and also at least a de facto NATO membership.
EU leaders are very unsettled because of what they've seen over the last 2 to 3 weeks.
Don't be. Calm down. That's my message. People really need to, take that deep breath, take the, ice bath and go to the sauna and stay cool, calm and collected. That's the best way to deal with these issues. We live in a world of public diplomacy where things have a tendency to get out of hand a little bit. Let's just bring it back. Have conversations behind closed doors and find solutions.
President Stubb, thank you so much for joining us.